Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Trevor Grossi, and today I've got some more very exciting, groundbreaking first-time reveals from the underworld of Giza. This is so huge, and it goes straight back to my original roots of how I got interested in these subjects and how I became obsessed with finding what is actually underneath the Giza Plateau. This is a lost videotape from Boris Said, who was the producer of Mystery of the Sphinx back in 1993. And that's the documentary in which John Anthony West, Dr. Robert Schoch, and many others brought forward evidence regarding the Sphinx and its true age based on geological analysis of the weathering patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure courtyard. Now, that was 1993, and it made waves in the geological community and the archaeological community. And of course, as I've mentioned in other of my films, John Anthony West was a dear friend of mine who I met in 2006. And so for 19 years, basically, I've been trying to figure out more about this situation. And I really leaned on him and his expertise to help me cut through some of the meaningless, pointless information and just really focus on what was really important. So this is really close to my own personal journey as I came to realize that there are very significant artifacts and chambers and tunnels and things like this under the Giza Plateau that do seem to be related to reports of ancient archives and record halls and artifact repositories. Mystery of the Sphinx was a primetime television special, and it made a huge impact. It was based on the original research of John Anthony West, which he won an Emmy for, and it was directed by Bill Coty and produced by a guy named Boris Said. Boris ended up having a bit of a falling out with John afterwards, and they didn't work together, but he went on to do several projects on the plateau in the mid 1990s, and that's mostly what this film is about. The release of this information actually started with me speaking to my friend Ray Grossi, and Ray had been invited to be a part of one of these expeditions with Dr. J.J. Hurtak, Boris Said, Joseph Schor, Joe Jehoda, and several others. This was a very important one of the expeditions as well, where they went down into the Osiris shaft and actually discovered on the third level the sarcophagus, or the sarcophagus lid at least, that later was called the Tomb of Osiris by Zahi and others. This was the very first discovery of that sarcophagus on the third level, and they discovered much more about it as well. We had been hearing about these GPR scans that had actually been done down there by Dr. Thomas Dobecki, who had been involved in the scans of the Sphinx several years earlier, though that was not GPR, that was seismic refraction tomography, technically. This was more of an acoustic sounding, and it was less exact. But we hear in this new video that Thomas Dobecki actually brought the GPR equipment to Egypt and did many scans that we have never seen. But in this film, we actually get the very first views of some of those scans, which is extremely important. This is especially considering that my friends in Italy, the Coffer Research Project, Corrado Malanga, Filippo Biondi, and Armando May, they have recently released an SAR Doppler tomography deep scan of the plateau showing the Osiris shaft and showing that beneath its third level, there are many more levels. Now, that's just one of the things that this film confirms. It also confirms that Bill Brown, in my earlier episodes of The Secret Underworld of Giza, was correct in saying that there were chambers below the third level of the Osiris shaft. So this is confirming all of that and so many other things as well. But we'll get into it piece by piece. Anyway, Ray had written this amazing article about everything that happened during that expedition that he attended and, how they discovered the sarcophagus, how they were asked to leave once they had, and how Zahi later showed up posing next to it, completely excavated after he had taken over, drained the water, and excavated the entire sarcophagus. After reading this article and speaking with Ray a lot about this, we decided to do an interview, which we released a few weeks ago. And that interview ended up raising so many more of these specific questions about how to find out what really came of this whole era where the shore expeditions were taking place. it kind of wrapped up right after that expedition where they were all in the Osiris shaft. So one of the things we have to reference this entire era was an interview with Boris Said and Art Bell. Actually, there were two interviews between them, and one of them also included Tom Danley, who was doing these acoustic experiments in the Great Pyramid and elsewhere on the plateau. So that's explained in this film. We'll get into that. But during those interviews with Art Bell, basically Boris was saying that he was selling this videotape, which was a 40-minute video that was based on all of the work they had already done in the years between Mystery of the Sphinx and 1997 when it was released. However, this videotape has never been public. He was just selling it on VHS, and this was so he could raise money to continue the expeditions at that time because, as he explains, he no longer wanted to work with Joseph Schor. So after interviewing Ray, I found an archived copy of the interview with Art Bell and Boris Said. So of course I posted this interview. I said, this is a really important missing piece of history. This is one of the only places that we can actually learn anything about these expeditions. It was kind of Boris's tell-all interview. Now, a lot of this stuff was being held up legally, between different people trying to decide whose information it was or who could release it. So some of that gets explained in the video, but the fact is it's never been released. That is until I asked that if anyone had any information or a copy of this videotape, that I would be very interested to see it. Then a few days later, my friend Bill Busha, who is also a researcher of these ancient mysteries and who had actually been to Egypt with John Anthony West and Robert Bauval and Robert Temple, I believe, around 2000 or 2001. And Bill said he also filmed so much of that trip as well, which sounds very interesting. But he also ran a video store and he had a copy of this VHS. So he shared that with me, and I immediately just asked if there was any way he could send me a copy or, I could at least see it, if not release it. But he surprised me and just went ahead and uploaded the whole thing to YouTube that day. So this was amazing. I watched it several times in a row that night, and I was so excited. Part of this film, at least the first 15 minutes or so, are actually recapping some of the themes from The Mystery of the Sphinx itself. I mean, this was basically the closest thing we have ever gotten to a sequel to Mystery of the Sphinx, which is the documentary that started everything. If it's not the sequel, it is the film that is about the sequel that would have been made. So it answers so many questions. And I have to really thank Bill Busha so much for bringing this forward because it's a piece of history that was lost, and I'm so glad it's finally public. I will put the entire film in the description below. You can watch Bill's upload of it on YouTube without having my commentary. But today I'm just going to go through the whole thing and stop where necessary just to explain some extra elements that relate to it and give a little conclusion at the end.
Good evening. My name is Boris Said. For the last 7 years, I've been making film documentaries in Egypt. First of these documentaries, from 1990 to 1993, followed the adventures of John Anthony West, who took a team of scientists to Egypt to attempt to redate the carving of the Great Sphinx of Egypt. The result of that work was a feature documentary, Prime Time on NBC, hosted by Charlton Heston. It was nominated for 2 Emmys and was awarded 1.
The Great Sphinx of Egypt, keeper of the ancient mysteries, guardian of the ancient secrets. The Sphinx is considered to be the greatest statue on Earth. Good evening. I'm Charlton Heston. Every 100 years or so, an idea comes along that can shake the world. An idea is so revolutionary that at first no one believes it could be true. When Galileo showed evidence that the Earth moved around the sun, the authorities arrested him. Many people refused to believe that the Wright brothers could fly, even after they'd been doing it for 2 years. But eventually, if the evidence is convincing, a theory can be accepted as common knowledge. What you're about to see could be history in the making. Tonight, we go to Egypt to examine the controversial theories of John Anthony West. West and his team of scientists challenge our long-held views about the origins of the Great Sphinx. They suggest the Sphinx was carved before Egypt became a desert, 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. It's remarkable that for thousands of years, the evidence has been in plain sight.
Now, if we pause right here, you can see this is the southern wall of the Sphinx enclosure, and this is where Schoch and West can be seen in this image, illustrating exactly how deep these vertical, rounded, undulating fissures are going into the bedrock. John is standing inside the largest crevice in which probably the majority of all rain that has ever fallen on the plateau has run down through. The catchment area for this is more than half of the plateau, which means all of that rain is going to ultimately stream down through this exact fissure. And we have proof today that as soon as they release this image, where John is standing right now, that has all been filled in with cement, mortar, and masonry. They covered up this crack in the wall because they didn't want people to see how deep these fissures really went. But this water-based weathering, precipitation-based weathering specifically. This isn't a flood. This is thousands of years of a rainforest climate dumping on the plateau and streaming into the Sphinx after it had already been carved. It's important to understand that only the head of the Sphinx ever stood above ground. All of the body was carved down into the ground, which is why you have this surrounding enclosure, or sometimes called the courtyard, around it. But this is an extremely important image because you can see before they covered this entire crack up exactly what it looked like. John could stand inside, and he made a point to do so.
Yet till now, no one has recognized its significance. If West's theories prove to be correct, the implications are staggering.
There is many theories like this has been said about the Sphinx, but all of it gone with the wind. Because we Egyptologists have a solid evidence to state that the Sphinx is dated to the time of Khafre, the builder of the second pyramid at the Giza Plateau.
In order to prove that the Sphinx was indeed older than people believed, it was first necessary to disprove the popularly held notion that the Sphinx was created in 2550 BC in the image of the pharaoh Khafre. To do this, we first hired a police forensic artist.
New York City detective Frank Domingo is one of America's leading forensic experts. A 26-year police veteran, he wrote a manual in the art and technique of facial identification used today by police investigators all across the nation.
If you had those photographs taken exactly.
If anyone could tell if the Sphinx was Khafre, it was Detective Frank Domingo. The procedure for measuring proportions, angles, and shapes had to be established before a comparison could be made. Comparison of the facial shapes was made more difficult due to the severe damage on the face of the Sphinx. Nevertheless, Detective Domingo established enough points of reference to make a comparison with the statue of Khafre possible. These points were the chin, the outer corner of the eye, and the brow ridge. While a study of the frontal view showed significant differences, the comparison of the lateral view was decisive. When the reference points in this lateral view were connected with vertical and horizontal lines, the difference of angles on the two works was extreme. The most conclusive finding was the angle between the outer eye and the vertical. In Khafre, that angle measured 14 degrees. But But on the Sphinx, the angle was more than double, 32 degrees. This explains the protrusion of the lower jaw found on the Sphinx, but not on Khafre.
After reviewing all the measurements, angles, and proportions, it's my conclusion that the Great Sphinx of Giza is not the same individual represented in the statue of the pharaoh Chephren.
Now, this is, of course, you know, extremely significant evidence because we know that the ancient Egyptians could replicate almost exactly the facial structure of the pharaohs. If they made even a slight deviation, we can tell that they're trying to show someone else. You know, if they're going to reproduce the pharaoh's face, they will do it exactly. So these major differences that Frank Domingo showed, these were primary evidence that certainly it was not intended ever to be Khafre's face. And that's an important piece of, it's one of the three pieces of evidence that the scholars keep holding to in order to say that Khafre built the Sphinx in the fourth dynasty, which is at this point an absurd claim. We have tons of evidence to prove that's not the case, but even still, it was covered in Mystery of the Sphinx. So that's what he's recapping right here.
Next, we consulted with Professor Robert Schoch.
Dr. Robert Schoch is an associate professor of science at Boston University. He holds a PhD in geology and geophysics from Yale University. Dr. Schoch is an expert in the erosional analysis of rocks. West and Schoch traveled to Egypt to examine the evidence firsthand. While Egyptologists look at monuments, geologists look at the stones they're made from. And those stones told Schoch that West was on the right track.
So it was through John that I ended up meeting Schoch, and I ended up going to Egypt with Dr. Schoch in 2019 and seeing a lot of these places. In fact, when he went into the Sphinx Temple, that was, I ended up getting to go into the Sphinx Temple with Schoch, and it was the first time he had actually entered it since recording The Mystery of the Sphinx, because that's a very special location. You have to pay the $2,000 private access fee. But most people don't do that on tours because they're more interested in getting the private access to the Sphinx enclosure itself, to the Great Pyramid, to other structures that tend to be more interesting to tourists. But Dr. Schoch, as a geologist, you know, we were on his tour getting to see a lot of the geological evidence, not just the flashy looking, beautiful inscriptions and art. We wanted to see the raw rocks and how they'd been weathered and all the proof that this does go back to a much more ancient time. So I do have personal experience with both John and Schoch, and I think they both brought forward evidence in this time period that is still some of the most compelling evidence for the Sphinx to be much more ancient. And it's important to recognize also that when the Sphinx was cut out of the ground, the stones were quarried out. Those stones were used in the Sphinx Temple. So we know that the Sphinx Temple corresponds to the same age as the building or the quarrying out of the body of the Sphinx. And this tells us so much in itself because the stones that were used, we can compare them to the layers of rock strata right next to them at the Sphinx itself and in the enclosure walls. And these are huge stones. These are some of the largest stones in all of Egypt. And they are clearly concurrent with that construction, that architecture is concurrent with the original creation of the Sphinx because they were the same stones pulled out and built into a temple right in front. So this basically tells us if the Sphinx is over 10,000 years old rather than just 4,500 years old, well, so is this most advanced megalithic stonework in all of the country of Egypt. The Sphinx Temple. It looks like things we see in Peru and some of the most massive stones used in the entire country. So this is an important detail. But let's see what else Schoch has to say here.
To a geologist, erosion tells the story of a rock's history. The limestone bedrock in Giza is like a layer cake composed of both hard and soft layers. The wind-driven sand scours out the softer layers, leaving the harder layers intact. On the other hand, rain weathering has an entirely different look. Rocks which have been weathered by rain have a round, undulating profile. This is very different in appearance from the hard, sharp profile caused by wind weathering. Schoch was certain that the walls of the Sphinx enclosure were eroded by water cascading down off the Giza Plateau. Water whose only possible source was rain. This was the key element in Schoch's argument. But when did it rain? Dr. John Kutzbach is a professor of paleoclimatology at the University of Wisconsin. Paleoclimatology is the study of ancient weather patterns.
The first way that we try to determine the climate of the past is by looking at observations. There are plenty of observations from North Africa that show that that region was covered with lakes in the past. Right now it's a desert, but 10,000 years ago there were lakes in the Sahara. Then there's an entirely different way that we figure out the climate of the past, and that's with our computer models. We then can calculate what the change in climate would be like for that time. And the amazing thing is that the geologic evidence and the computer simulations both agree that around 10,000 years ago the Sahara was wetter than it is now.
Now, right here, you're seeing that even in 1993, when this was released, John was already showing the face of a lion rather than a man on the Sphinx in that early period. So again, John was way ahead of his time because we've since completely confirmed that there was a lioness in the time before Khafre's period. And this can be proven through especially the work of Dr. Manu Safzadeh, who wrote the book Under the Sphinx. And he brought forward so many pieces of hieroglyphic evidence and artistic renderings of this lioness statue at Giza, known as Mehit, the guardian of the sacred archives. So this again is also giving proof that Edgar Cayce was not the only person to say that there was a sacred or royal archive directly beneath the Sphinx. And yeah, it's amazing to see that in 1993, John had already noted that the head was recarved and that it was originally a lion. So let's continue.
If the Sphinx was damaged by rain, and the evidence suggests it was much wetter in the Sahara region 9,000 to 10,000 years ago, then the Sphinx must be at least 9,000 years old.
But the most conclusive proof of all was furnished by our seismic expert, Dr. Tom Dobecki. Dr. Dobecki used a seismograph to study the underground texture of the rock around the Sphinx.
I think our initial investigation around the Sphinx was very successful from a couple of different perspectives. One, we got hard, defensible data on the degree and the nature of the weathering of the limestone surrounding the Sphinx, all of which supports Bob Schoch's theories. But even more exciting and more interesting to me is the unexpected discovery of several large cavity features around and under the Sphinx. This is a fairly large feature. It's about 9 meters by 12 meters in dimension and buried less than 5 meters in depth. Now, the regular shape of this, rectangular, is inconsistent with naturally occurring cavities. So there's some suggestion this could be man-made.
Man-made. It's very interesting. Keep that in mind for just a minute. There have been many predictions about the role the Sphinx would play in our future. One of the most compelling was by this man. Edgar Cayce gained popularity in the mid-40s as America's sleeping prophet. In deep trance, Cayce revealed detailed information about ancient Egypt. 50 years ago, Cayce predicted that a chamber would be found under the front paws of the Sphinx. This chamber, he said, would contain records of the civilization that inspired the entire Egyptian culture. He called that civilization Atlantis. According to Cayce, the Atlanteans were a technologically advanced society who fled to Egypt when their continent of Atlantis sank into the ocean to be lost forever. Fantasy, wild dreams, maybe. But the unexpected cavities detected by the seismograph were located precisely where Edgar Cayce said they would be, under the front paws of the Great Sphinx. The seismograph does not dream.
Yes, that's a very good, important point, and I'm also going to be releasing some extremely exciting new evidence for the first time from the ARE. I have permission to release a document from their archives showing what they believe to be the location of the record halls Edgar Cayce predicted. This is very, very huge disclosure that comes from several decades ago, but it's never been revealed to the world, and that's going to be released in the Secret Underworld of Giza coming up in one of the coming episodes. So stay tuned for that. But it's basically a prediction from the source itself based on all of the different projects the ARE sponsored, working in the 70s, even 80s, 90s with the Stanford Research Institute, with Zahi Hawass. This was a period where Mark Lehner and Dr. Hawass were both working with Hugh Lane Cayce, who is Edgar Cayce's son. So these were investigations on the ground based on what Cayce had actually predicted himself. And we know that he didn't say this chamber below the pause was actually the record hall. He just said it was the entrance chamber that would lead to the record hall. So we've got more on that coming soon too. And it is very, very exciting. It matches perfectly with some of our other information, but we'll get into that later.
That finding aroused a lot of comment and excitement, especially in New Age circles. John West and I spent almost 2 years trying to get permission from the Egyptian authorities to excavate this chamber. But we met with little success, and finally, after 2 years of trying, I moved on to other film projects. Then, in 1995, I was on holiday in Egypt. I called on Dr. Hawass and took him to lunch and suggested to him that it might be fun to make another documentary, this time with less science involved, a documentary about the fantastic legends and mythology that existed around the Great Sphinx of Egypt. I asked Dr. Hawass if he would be our Egyptian host and Egyptological expert, and to my surprise, he agreed. I returned to New York, raised some seed money, and 2 months later, in October, I was back in Egypt with a small crew, following Dr. Hawass around the plateau. We recorded hours of conversation. Dr. Hawass told us many fascinating stories, myths and legends about the Great Sphinx. Then one day, he asked me what it would take to create another documentary that would be a prime-time network special, like Mystery of the Sphinx had been. I told Dr. Hawass that in order to assure that sort of success, we would have to find something new, discover something, open a tunnel, perhaps a new tomb. Dr. Hawass motioned us to follow him and led us to the rump of the Sphinx. There he uncovered a small passage, a sort of opening to a tunnel underneath the rump, and carefully lowered himself down into a tunnel-like structure or cavern under the rump of the Sphinx.
Now we're showing that the hole right next to the tail of the Sphinx. This is an extremely important tunnel. We know that he did excavate it based on information that came from a worker who had been present earlier on when it was known this tunnel was there and pointed out which stone this tunnel was behind. They removed this stone and they found this. So he and Lehner excavated it back then, and he went down into it. You're about to see some extremely important footage that many people have seen or heard quoted, but not many people know where it originally came from. So I'll let you see it right now.
And then an extraordinary thing happened.
This tunnel has been never opened before. No one really knows what's inside this tunnel. But we are going to open it for the first time.
Several days later, I met with Dr. Hawass and his superior, Dr. Nur el-Din, who was the secretary of the Egyptian Antiquities Organization. We discussed a contract and the possibility that Dr. Hawass would actually open this new tunnel under the Sphinx while we would do the filming. They promised to consider the contract and get back to me in a week or 10 days, and I returned to New York. There has never been another mention of that contract, and I never heard from them about the tunnel again.
Wow. Yes, this was when Zahi was down there. There's more footage of that little sample he gave in a minute, but basically he's saying Zahi wanted to open up the end of that tunnel, which is underneath the Sphinx. And I've mentioned in a couple different films in the past that we do have one account from Dr. Hawass himself that comes from Elena Danaan. She said that in 1998, which is the year after this film came out, but it's also the year when suddenly Zahi started saying that there's absolutely nothing under the Sphinx at all. But earlier in that year, he told Elena Danaan she could go down to the bottom of that tunnel and see what was actually in there. And he said that it led down to the bottom where it reached into a long, vast hall underneath the body of the Sphinx. Then later that year, suddenly, no, there's nothing under the Sphinx at all. This is when Zahi changed his story. But what we're seeing now came out a year before all that happened. So at this time, what you're seeing, Zahi going down into that tunnel, he already knew at this point, I believe, that it did lead to a long haul under the body, and I believe he really wanted to show the world. He certainly wanted to create a new television spectacle and be on camera and bring attention to Egypt. This is an extraordinary find. You know, what was underneath at the end of this tunnel is extremely important. It cannot be overstated. Because today we know that the bottom of the tunnel has been cemented shut. It's been blocked off. It's very difficult to get access to go in there, but if you know the right people, you can pay $10,000 to $15,000 for private access, and you'll have to sign an NDA, and you won't be allowed to film or videotape. So nobody can see basically that the bottom has been cemented shut intentionally in our current era. So with that context in place, let's keep going here.
But while I was back in New York, I took the footage from Dr. Hawass and I made a promotional film, a 7-minute promotional film, which I'd like to show you now because it will show you where we were at that time and what it was we had in mind and the kind of film we were trying to make.
The Secret Chamber, the trailer for the film that never got to be made.
Really, even Indiana Jones will never dream to be here. Can you believe it? We are now inside the Sphinx in this tunnel. This tunnel has been never opened before. No one really knows what's inside this tunnel. But we are going to open it for the first time.
How about that? He admits no one has ever opened this, no one ever seen what's inside it. Of course, he wasn't going to open it live without ever having seen what's inside of it, but he is clearly telling us that he wants to show the whole world what's in there. He's excited about it, and this has been quoted many times, but nobody really knew where this came from. So clearly, at the moment when this was filmed, he was ready to do it. And we'll get into what ended up happening as we go along here. That's the Sphinx Temple. See those eroded huge blocks? They were quarried out from the Sphinx's body, from around it.
The great Sphinx of Egypt. Symbol of mystery throughout the world. Tonight, we'll explore legends that have challenged historians since the beginning of time. losses, my son. The sands of the sanctuary on which I rest have covered me. Legend has it that the Sphinx appeared to a young prince in a dream, promising him the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt if he would restore the great statue to its former splendor. Historical fact. Tutmosis IV repaired the eroded body of the Sphinx and came to wear the crown of Egypt exactly as the Sphinx had promised.
Now that was over 1,000 years after the supposed building by Khafra that Tutmosis IV actually erected this dream stele there, telling the story of that dream he had and how he ended up becoming pharaoh. And of course, we can see right here the Hall of Records glyph, as I call it, or that symbol that shows this kind of giant library-looking hall with shelves or something to that effect that is directly under the body of the Sphinx. It's something I talk about quite a bit, but I'll let it keep going.
The stela clearly shows the Sphinx lying on top of a structure, a sanctuary. Could the Sphinx be guarding a secret chamber? Edgar Cayce, America's famous sleeping prophet, predicted in 1946 that a chamber would be discovered beneath the left front paw of the Sphinx. A chamber containing the recorded history of human civilization.
It's actually not completely accurate. He said it was under the paws of the Sphinx and it was the entry to it, but he actually specified that it was the right paw that had the access point, which I can explain a little bit more about what I think that actually means, but that will be in the coming film in the Secret Underworld when I reveal this new map from the ARE that the world has never seen before. I think this access point may actually come from maybe in a couple things, but I'm leaning towards the shaft that goes down right behind the right shoulder of the right paw, the right front paw. But we'll get to that soon.
Scientific fact. In 1991, American scientists used seismography to define a rectangular cavity precisely under the left front paw of the Sphinx. Does the answer to the riddle of the Sphinx describe the true origins of man? Or does the mystery of the Sphinx go beyond, to encompass the entire universe? The legend of Osiris, the first Egyptian god. Osiris set sail from between the paws of the Sphinx to create a home for the pharaohs in the heavens. He chose the constellation of Orion as the place through which the pharaohs would pass on their way to the afterlife. Astronomical fact, the monuments of the Giza Plateau are a mathematically exact scale model of the constellation Orion, as it appeared in 10,500 BC. This date coincides with the dawning of the age of Leo. The great lion-like body of the Sphinx looks east, at a point on the horizon where the constellation Leo was precisely located in 10,500 BC. For the first time ever, on television, we'll show you what lies beneath this great statue. A chamber which will be open tonight, live, for our television cameras. Do we really want to know the truth about the origins of humankind? Are we prepared to face the reality of an afterlife? Perhaps we will be better served to leave the last stones unturned. and allow the legends of the Sphinx to live on forever. What do you think?
I think we should open it.
I took this short promotional film to Dr. Schor, and 2 months later signed a joint venture agreement with the Schor Foundation to make a film about the exploration and search for the secret chamber under the paws of the Sphinx. Dr. Schor became the leader of the expedition and took charge of all science while providing me with the funds to make my movie. It seemed like a perfect alliance. Shortly before we returned to Egypt with a full crew, Dr. Schor announced publicly his purpose for conducting the expeditions in Egypt. Dr. Schor stated that he was searching for, quote, underground faults, unquote, on the Giza Plateau in order to safeguard tourists in the event of earthquakes on the Giza Plateau. Right. I was astonished. I mean, Dr. Schor had been on our first expedition. Dr. Schor had been an observer for the Cayce Foundation. Dr. Schor's sole interest was in finding the chamber under the Great Sphinx. I couldn't understand the reason for all this double talk.
Exactly. Wow. Why did Dr. Schor not want to say that's what he was doing, that he was looking for the Hall of Records? He's an ARE member. He's an Edgar Cayce member. Why wouldn't he want to say that that's what he was actually doing? Or did he want to convince the ministry that he was doing something more reasonable that had nothing to do with Atlantis? Well, Zahi knew. Zahi knew he was a member of the ARE. Zahi got his start in college at Pennsylvania University through Dr. Schor. They've known each other for years when this happened. I mean, decades. So why was Dr. Schor trying to insist that this had nothing to do with Edgar Cayce, with the Hall of Records, or with Atlantis? And something Boris addresses more as we go on.
We returned to Egypt in March of 1996. Dr. Dobecki was again our lead scientist. This time he had the latest state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar.
Look at that. They're doing GPR on the body of the Sphinx. They're trying to look into the Sphinx itself, not only on the ground around it. That's pretty important too.
And in a very short time managed to reconfirm the location of the room that he'd found in 1991 with his seismic tests.
There we go. Dr. Thomas Dobecki went back. This is 1995. He brings GPR equipment to scan the chamber under the paws. Now, we have never seen those scans. I want to make this very clear. We saw the results of their seismic tomography tests in 91 and 2, but we have never seen the GPR scan that he went back to get in 1995, and Boris Said just confirmed that it happened. There were other GPR scans that happened on the plateau at that time as well, which I've kind of mentioned, but we're going to see a bit more of confirmation of exactly how many spots were GPR scanned at that time by Dr. Dobecki. And I can tell you right now, I am doing everything humanly possible to attempt to reach him, to attempt to scour through the ARE archives, because Joseph Schor may have actually archived these GPR scans themselves in the Edgar Cayce ARE archives. But that's about the only two places we might expect we could possibly find those lost GPR scans. It's so sad that they never got to come forward. I'm going to see what I can do to make that happen.
Several days later, Dr. Dobecki also located a tunnel emerging from under the rump of the Sphinx, about 15 feet down.
Look at that one, 15 feet. Coming at the back of the Sphinx right there, headed right over towards the Osiris shaft, headed right over towards the entire Sphinx causeway, a tunnel leading out from the west end of the Sphinx, 15 feet down. That's another bombshell.
Several days later, Dr. Dobecki also located a tunnel emerging from under the rump of the Sphinx, about 15 feet down, and heading off in the direction of the Chephren Pyramid, generally following the route of the old causeway. Dr. Schor immediately applied for permission to excavate this tunnel, or at least that's what he told us he did. By the 1st of May, we were all at home, waiting for a response from the Egyptian government. As the summer wore on, I began to worry that we would never get permission from the Egyptians to excavate this chamber, and I thought I'd better get some content, some scientific content for my film.
So they found the tunnel going over to the Sphinx Causeway that heads all the way over to the Middle Pyramid. Well, we have much more evidence to present to show you that, yes, there is a tunnel straight from the Sphinx to the Middle Pyramid. And more so than that, there are also tunnels that split off of that towards the Great Pyramid and the Menkaure Pyramid as well. I'm going to be presenting more information about that as also in the Secret Underworld coming episodes very soon. But yeah, he's confirming that they got that much and that for some reason this application for the permit to actually excavate that tunnel never came through.
Now, I'd always been fascinated by the Great Pyramid. I'd spent several nights inside that structure, and it's pretty amazing. You spend the night in the Great Pyramid, when you come out, you're energized. You don't sleep for 2 or 3 nights after that, and I'd always wondered, the source for this incredible energy. The sounds inside the pyramid were extraordinary, the echoes and the vibrations and the reverberations, and I determined to try and find Tom Danley, who had done our sonic levitation experiments in the first show.
Acoustic levitation is a non-magical way of floating an object in midair using very loud sound.
Now, we have lots of people today doing laboratory experiments using acoustic waves to create levitation effects, but this was 1993. This was Mystery of the Sphinx. Tom Danley was one of the first people doing it, and John West insisted on including this in the film to show the potential, at least, that potentially seismic waves could have been used to help reduce the gravitational effect on the stones, basically. Now, they're just levitating tiny little balls of styrofoam, but these were some of the first experiments to prove that it could be done, at least with a tiny object. And so, in theory, the principle may have been applied in some way to much larger stones, like the megalithic blocks we see building the Great Pyramid. Way ahead of his time, both of them, actually. And we're going to see more about Tom Danley's acoustic experiments within the Great Pyramid here. So this is really good stuff.
The levitation that we do is done by having 1 or 2 sound sources and a reflector. And the sound bounces off the reflector, and on its way back down, the 2 sound fields pass through each other. In that region where there's the interference of those 2 sound fields, there are little wells that you can actually levitate small objects the size of a pea in.
Could this levitation by sound provide a clue as to how the ancient Egyptians were able to raise these gigantic blocks?
I'd love to go to Egypt, but lifting the block is a little beyond what we can do currently. The frequency required is much lower than we can produce at sufficient intensity, and the reflector that you'd have to have above the object would be approximately 1/4 mile across.
Today's most advanced science can levitate a small rock, but nothing that compares with the blocks in the Sphinx and Valley temples.
It wasn't hard to convince Tom to come to Egypt with us, to run some sonic tests in the Great Pyramid. In November, the Schor expedition returned to the Giza Plateau. While Dr. Schor busied himself with the officials trying to get permission to dig down into the tunnel, Dr. Danley set up his speakers and amplifiers, computers and sensing devices in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid and in the 5 chambers immediately above the King's Chamber. Now, the ownership of the actual footage of Danley's tests is presently being disputed in the courts, but I can show you some photographs and tell you what we found. It was amazing. Danley found that there were certain notes that were reinforced by the very structure of the chamber and by the characteristics of the stone used to construct the King's Chamber and the so-called sarcophagus inside it. Moreover, these notes or vibrations were enhanced and reinforced somehow by the design and construction of the 5 chambers above the King's Chamber. But the most extraordinary findings of all came after Tom Danley had returned to his laboratories in Chicago. He found that there were vibrations present in the king's chamber even after his machinery had been switched off. Now, these vibrations were below the range of human hearing, below 16 hertz, some going down as low as half a hertz. Tom Danley felt that the source for these vibrations was the wind blowing across the ends of the air shafts that led from the king's chamber and the queen's chamber to the exterior of the pyramid. Now remember, when the pyramid was first built, the sides were smooth. They were made of polished limestone. And this would have greatly enhanced the effect of the wind blowing across these holes. Sort of like playing a flute or blowing across the end of a Coke bottle. But wait, it gets better. When we raised the vibrations, these wind-induced vibrations, by 3 octaves so that we could hear them, lo and behold, they were the same notes that Tom Danley had found resident in the king's chamber. The same notes that were enhanced by the structure of the pyramid itself. These notes, which Danley found resident in the king's chamber, formed an F-sharp chord. We checked with our scientific consultant, Dr. James Hertok, and learned that early Egyptian texts suggested that the ancient Egyptian priests believed F-sharp to be the harmonic of our planet Earth, and that these notes were also in perfect harmony with the vibrations of the human body.
Dr. J.J. Hertek was a part of several of these expeditions in those years, and I've also been speaking with him. We're planning to talk soon. I think he will share a lot more about what was going on in that time. But he was also in the original Mystery of the Sphinx documentary. He's been working on the Giza Plateau since at least, I think, the 70s.
Was the pyramid simply a tomb for a pharaoh, as Egyptologists insist? Or did the ancient priests of Egypt, or perhaps Atlantis, conduct rituals and rites of transformation in the pyramid, as the ancient texts suggest? Many visitors to Egypt have experienced the strange power of the pyramid. Napoleon claimed he was profoundly altered by his night in the great structure. What actually happened to Napoleon? Do the resonant harmonic frequencies which Tom Danley identified in the king's chamber have an effect on what medical researchers now call the body-mind complex?
Now, when Napoleon went into the Great Pyramid, this may be a rumor. We don't really know. Some of his biographers tended to say that he never actually did go in the Great Pyramid, but the legend is he went in, spent a night inside, and then came out so visibly shaken that he was basically petrified of what went on. The indication is that he encountered something, someone, perhaps whatever he saw or experienced in there scared him so much that he actually packed up the entire Egypt expedition, which was a huge production. He had brought all of these artists and savants and researchers from Europe, the top minds of the day, to come and analyze all the structures of Egypt. And this was supposedly the very end of it when he went and spent this night inside the Great Pyramid and got very freaked out about it. And that's also very important because they were doing an excavation at the Sphinx, and he had supposedly dug out enough of the sand between the 2 front paws to the point where he actually accessed the passageway that is directly behind the dream stele. And this is one of the least known entrances on the body of the Sphinx. It's literally directly below the Sphinx's chin. So he went and supposedly actually accessed that hatch just before he ended up having this experience and fleeing. So we don't really know how much of that chamber he saw, but we have several accounts to say that it's just a small chamber that basically doesn't go anywhere, is what Mark Lehner said when he and Hawass were excavating it in this time period in the 90s or 80s. And I have other accounts that seem to suggest that there was something more to it, and that it even had a staircase that led downward into this very same long hall under the body that Zahi described to Elena, at least. That's the only account I've heard of him actually admitting that that long hall under the body exists. But we do also have these interesting images, for instance, from George Reisner in 1913, showing this very long hall in or below the body, and some other sources that seem to suggest that.
What happens to us when we're subjected to long periods of exposure to ultra-low frequency environments? History tells us that the pyramids were built around 3500 BC. It is also an historical fact that no mummy has ever been found in the Great Pyramid, nor has anyone ever found any of the artifacts normally associated with the elaborate Egyptian funereal rituals. And please consider this. The earliest mummified remains of a pharaoh ever found date back to 2550 BC. During the first 1,000 years of pharaonic rule in Egypt, after the construction of the Great Cheops Pyramid in 3500 BC, not a single mummy of a pharaoh has ever been found. How come? Could the Great Pyramid have been a scientific device of some sort? A means by which the pharaoh ascended to his afterlife in the heavens without experiencing what we call death? We'll get back to Egypt in just a moment, but first, this is Ward Stroud, the maker of Native American ceremonial flutes, halfway around the world in Oregon. Just listen. Ward believes that the flute is an instrument which is sacred to Mother Earth. His flutes are tuned to the key of F sharp. Many Native American flute makers tune their instruments to the key of F sharp as well. There was one more event that took place on the Giza Plateau during November of 1996 that you should all know about. Back in 1992, one of the guides on the Giza Plateau had, for 20 bucks, taken me down into an old abandoned well, 300 yards west of the Sphinx, under the causeway leading from the Chephren Pyramid. Shortly after midnight, we climbed down a rusty old ladder for some 70 feet to a room-like area where an old pump lay against a wall. There were 2 chambers opening off this main room, and these smaller chambers contained huge outer sarcophagi. The inner burial caskets were missing. We continued on down another rickety ladder for 50 feet or so, emerging finally into a cavern. We were standing on a narrow, muddy ridge which jutted out into a pool of water.
Now, this is the Osiris shaft. He's just calling it a well at this point because it hadn't been named that yet. But this is some of the original footage of first entering into the 3rd level, some of the first footage we've ever had from the 3rd level. Salim Hassan had discovered the structure in 1933, but he had only made it down to the 2nd level, where he actually said that there were 7 sarcophagi in there, which very few are remaining. Only 2 are still there today. But this is extremely unique footage. This is showing that very first expedition I've been talking about and all the other films I've put out on this recently.
The top was covered with scum, but when we carefully brushed the surface dirt away, we found ourselves staring into a crystal clear pool of water, perhaps 12 feet deep. At the easterly end of the well, the end closest to the Sphinx, a pile of rocks was clearly visible. The story the old guy had told me was that a well had been dug back in 1946. He said that 2 young Nubian boys were in the bottom of the shaft, chipping away at the floor of the shaft, when suddenly there was a cave-in. The floor gave way, and the boys tumbled about 15 or 20 feet to a room-like cavern. When the dust had settled, the boys found to their horror that they were lying on a polished black granite sarcophagus lid. They looked around, and there was a tunnel, also filled with sarcophagi. The boys were terrified that they'd disturbed the resting place of the dead, some sacred place, some sacred burial place. They covered over the casket that they'd fallen on with some dirt. They took some stones and piled them up to cover over the tunnel, and they fled to the surface. All further work on the well was abandoned. Then, in 1964, the Aswan Dam was built. This raised the water level on the Giza Plateau by some 40 feet. The well was flooded, pumps and piping were installed, and the well was used to provide water to the neighboring houses. So, in the fall of 1996, while we were waiting for permission to dig into the tunnel under the Sphinx, I went back to the old well with our camera crew. We climbed down to the bottom and found to our surprise that the water level had dropped by at least 15 feet. There, along the easterly wall, was the pile of rocks, just as I had seen it, underwater. The pile was now easily accessible. And that's not all. We scraped out a flat area near the base of the ladder to set up our tripod.
Right there, you can see they are scraping off the mud of the sarcophagus lid. This is the very first view the world ever had of the sarcophagus on the third level, what has since become called the Tomb of Osiris.
There was the polished black granite sarcophagus, just as the boys had described it to the old guide. I came back home to Friday Harbor in time for Christmas and resumed a long negotiation with the Fox television network, a negotiation which had begun almost 5 months earlier. I remember January to have been a very intense month indeed. Dr. Schor and I had already met with Rupert Murdoch, the president of Fox, and he'd convinced us that he was genuinely interested in our project. All the more so, we felt, because we found out that he was a 33rd degree Mason.
That's something, isn't it? Yes, Rupert Murdoch was one of the only people who was interested in funding their project, besides Joseph Schor, and it's because he was a 33rd degree Mason. Now, Rupert Murdoch owns News Corporation, he owns Fox, he owns National Geographic at this point, is also purchased by News Corp. Rupert Murdoch is a media mogul. He owns half the media. So this is very interesting. Boris just says straight up, yeah, well, he was a 33rd degree Mason, and that's why he was interested in this. And it's interesting also to look forward to what actually did end up happening was in 1999, Zahi did finally get his new Fox television live special, which was called Opening the Lost Tombs Live. And there's some very interesting footage in that. Maybe I'll even include at the end here.
While the contracts went back and forth between lawyers, Dr. Schor and I determined a mid-February date for our return to Egypt. We had decided to lower Dr. Dobecki and his radar down to the bottom of the well, try and find out what lay behind the pile of rocks, and, for that matter, under the sarcophagus lid.
Wow. They actually brought the GPR equipment down to the third level of the Osiris shaft. This is huge.
The problem began when we got the final draft of the contract back from Fox. It was simple enough, really. They wanted absolute control of absolutely everything. Script, content, personnel, everything. In return, they offered to repay Dr. Schor's investment in the film, and for 2 years of my work, they offered me 15% of the net profit. Now, for those of you who aren't up on the latest Hollywood schemes, let me assure you that there is no such thing as net profit. There is never a net profit in Hollywood. Trust me, books have been written on this subject.
Absolutely no compensation, and they wanted complete control over all the information. Well, this is how National Geographic, History Channel, Smithsonian, this is how these big, largely Masonic-owned corporations tend to get control of the entire narrative by controlling what's allowed to come out and what's not. So it certainly was not a transparent offer. There was no way they could actually show what they were really going to find if they went with this contract.
But the real problem with the contract was not money, it was the issue of control. I simply felt that I could not guarantee the integrity of the project the way the contract was written, so I refused to sign it. Well, Dr. Schor just went ballistic.
So he's saying Joe Schor was upset that he didn't sign the contract with Fox, which has to make us kind of start questioning Joseph Schor's motives in this. Why would he want Boris to sacrifice control over the project and hand it over to 33rd degree Mason Rupert Murdoch and Fox? Why? We have to wonder.
Somehow we reached an uneasy truce, and in February we again set off for Egypt in full force. The plan was to explore the well with radar and then attempt to persuade the authorities to do an impromptu dig in the rock pile to see what lay behind it. We felt that since the rocks had already been moved once, we would not actually be excavating, just sort of rearranging. For a while, everything went smoothly. Dobecki was lowered safely to the bottom of the well.
Wow, there's one of the very first images. There's a couple clips of the actual GPR scans here, but there you can see on the computer, this was Thomas Dobecki doing GPR scans on the third level of the Osiris shaft. This is major, major stuff.
He fired up his radar and soon established that the black granite slab was only the lid of a sarcophagus. It was about 2 feet thick, and there was no sarcophagus underneath it.
It's only the lid. There was no sarcophagus under it. Now, after this whole expedition, you'll see Zahi come forward and photographs of him sitting next to it, where the lid is positioned over the sarcophagus in the middle of the room, but this was not the case originally. And Bill Brown, as well as others in Secret Underworld, we were ahead of this story as well. Bill told us about these scans that were done at the third level of the Osiris shaft in Secret Underworld of Giza. Bill also describes a fourth level to the Osiris shaft underneath the third one.
Well, there's another level below the third level. There's a fourth level. We have the proof of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Our friend went in and they did the ground penetrating radar, and it showed room underneath it.
And this was before the Copper Project came out with their scans showing the column that went down much further with many additional chambers below the third level. So Bill said in our series, yes, there are additional levels below the third level at the Osiris shaft. He said they did GPR scans down there and I saw them. Well, these are the scans he's talking about. And the fact that this sarcophagus lid was not actually on the sarcophagus is also very important as well. Because what you're seeing here, that lid, it seems that it had actually fallen down from the third level. It was right at the base of the stairs there. And according to Bill, it didn't even fit on top of the sarcophagus that we see in the middle of the room. So this may have been a separate one. But we do see Zahi posing with it. It's raised up a bit, so you can't see it sealing onto the actual sarcophagus that's there, or the box that's there. So this is another very important point to make.
Then we hit the jackpot.
This is one of the first shots we've ever seen of the actual GPR scans Dobecki got down there. Amazing.
The radar showed a void located about 9 feet below the sarcophagus lid.
A void 9 feet below the sarcophagus lid. Now again, that's right underneath the ladder coming down to the third level.
According to Dr. Dobecki, this anomalous cavity, as he called it, descended at an angle of 25 degrees directly toward the rear of the Sphinx, 300 yards to the east.
There you can see it, an angle of 25 degrees. It's going directly towards the Sphinx. So here's our view of the tunnel leading from the Osiris shaft all the way over to the Sphinx. And this is also confirming what the Copper Project has showed us recently, that there are further chambers below the third level.
Dr. Dobecki stated that this steeply dipping characteristic convinced him that this was not a natural fault, but rather a man-made feature.
So how about that? Now we're seeing this tunnel going all the way not only to the rump of the Sphinx, but also straight over to Anomaly A under the left front paw. At least that's how they're depicting it in this image here.
And then we found the icing on the cake, which convinced us all. A transverse radar scan revealed that this cavity was about 8 feet wide and had a domed ceiling. That's when the trouble really started.
A domed ceiling. That's very interesting as well, because I'm going to share, again, in these next coming episodes of the Secret Underworld of Giza, certain maps and ancient mystery school teachings that have supposedly been incorporated into diagrams showing a domed hall directly behind the Sphinx, directly on the path of this tunnel we're talking about, and right behind the rump of the Sphinx, basically. And this domed hall behind the long rectangular hall that's under its body, we're told actually has a split where it connects over to all three pyramids. There are tunnels going out all three directions from there. So the fact that Dobecki had seen a domed ceiling, this is also an extremely important point.
I rushed off to find our Egyptian inspector to tell him what we'd found, and he told me that we had no right to use the radar down in the well on this trip. He said that our permit specifically called for the right to shoot, to film the radar, not to operate it. And that's when I found out that Dr. Schor's permit to explore the plateau had been revoked at the end of 1996. Somehow he had neglected to tell me that small detail. That brings us to where we are today, more or less. Dr. Schor has started a lawsuit and has snarled our film in a lengthy court battle.
So Boris didn't even know that they didn't have the right to use the equipment. They were just supposed to go down there and make a promo, make it look like they were radar scanning it, but they weren't supposed to actually use it. Boris wasn't even informed of this. So what's up with Schor telling him that they had the permit to do it, getting him in trouble for actually doing it? It doesn't quite make sense. And this is what led to these GPR scans being controversial or held up in court, between Schor and Boris and Thomas. We don't know who really has the rights to them.
As recently as 4 weeks ago, I went down to the Edgar Cayce Foundation, where Dr. Schor and Zahi were both featured speakers. I met with Dr. Hawaz, and he agreed that he would help us enter the tunnel. He would actually enter the tunnel himself and allow us to film it, if Dr. Schor would agree to a peaceful settlement of our problems. I tried, but unfortunately Dr. Schor would have none of it. He refused, and that was the end of that.
So this was, again, 1997 when this video came out. He's saying in 97, 4 months before recording this, Dr. Hawass and Dr. Schor were both presenting at the ARE. Now, this was probably the annual conference they do there regarding ancient mysteries, and Bill Brown and I were actually there last year, and we presented the information that we have of the newer GPR scans we brought forward from 2006 that Bill Brown did with the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics, and we presented some other information as well. But it's well known. Zahi goes and lectures at the ARE all the time, actually, and he does still have a working relationship with the Edgar Cayce Foundation, even though he publicly denies having any association with the organization in his early years. And technically, I don't think he really did. It was that Joe Jehoda and Joseph Schor were both members of the ARE, and they were the ones who sponsored his education at Pennsylvania University. So it wasn't directly the ARE funding his college, but it was two members of the ARE that did that and who were still friends with him even here in 1995, 6, 7, when they were making these expeditions.
Now, finally, I've become convinced that Dr. Schor never wanted to go public with this information at all. I believe that it was always his intention to keep news of the secret chamber and its contents from the public. I believe he used me. I believe he used my ability to get a permit, my ability to get things done in Egypt, to further his own private purposes. I think he intended to keep this from the world from the very beginning. My partners and I are resolved not to let this happen, and we're trying to raise enough money to return to Egypt and reshoot our film. We have asked Dr. Hawaz to open the tunnel himself with a team of Egyptian scientists on behalf of the Egyptian government. We have offered to share with them the revenue which our film will generate. If you are watching this program, then be assured that you have already contributed to this cause, and that's what this project has become. A cause. Whatever knowledge lies buried beneath the Sphinx is a legacy for all mankind. I believe that it belongs on the world stage for all to see and evaluate for themselves. Thank you all for watching.
Okay, so let's go through some of the main points here from this film. First of all, we already knew about Anomaly A. This came from Mystery of the Sphinx itself. This 9 by 12 meter chamber below the Sphinx's front paws, but below the left paw, and which Dobecki says is less than 5 meter depth. So that's pretty shallow compared to some of these other chambers we've seen. They asked for permission for 2 years to try and find any way to access that chamber, get into it, but met with no success on that. And then eventually in 95, there was another attempt where Boris came to Hawass and tried to ask him, if they could make another film about anything related to it. And he agreed, but he said he wanted something like another Mystery of the Sphinx, another primetime TV special. And Boris said, well, then you'd need another major revelation to bring forward. So Zahi said, why don't you guys come look at this tunnel by the tail of the Sphinx? And when that happened, he did let Boris film him all over the plateau and even inside that tunnel, saying, we're willing to open this tunnel up on live TV for the first time. Of course, that wasn't going to happen. Of course, they would never do it live without already knowing what was in there. But at least he was open to showing it, whether it was live or not, because obviously they had already been in there. So they brought Dr. Thomas Dobecki back on site with actual GPR equipment this time, not just seismic refraction equipment. And they were doing scans all near the Sphinx, between the Sphinx and the Osiris shaft, and even at the third level of the Osiris shaft, where they technically weren't supposed to be using the equipment, but were allowed to bring it down there and just film it as if they were going to scan there. But they really did scan there. They really did find anomalies about 9 feet below the sarcophagus lid, so right below the third level of the chamber, which does correspond to what the Coffer Project has shown us. It is the GPR scan that Bill Brown referenced in the earlier episodes of Secret Underworld of Giza. So it validates all of that, and it shows that there is more below the Osiris shaft. Okay, these are the three levels of the Osiris shaft right here, second level, third level. So this is the third level chamber right here. And you can see underneath it, this right here, you see this light green area that even comes out into the blue here? This could be the tunnel that they're talking about. Now keep in mind, this is a 2D slice down through the ground. So if it's not perfectly aligned to the tunnel, we're not going to see the continuation of it, but we could just see it cutting through it at an angle basically where it's showing an indication of it, and that we can see that something continues on here. So perhaps this is the exact tunnel that they're talking about, because if we remember, he said it was 9 feet below the third level. So this would be pretty much in the right location, and it's slightly sloping down towards the Sphinx off in this direction. So that's pretty amazing. Now, when we compare it, I flipped this image, reversed it left to right so that it's looking the right direction. So this would be west and this would be east. And we see that same tunnel running through here. That would be the same one as this one. Whether this is directly under the Osiris shaft or somewhere between there and the Sphinx, we're not shown enough data to really say, but this is basically somewhere along that distance, the approximate slope angle of the tunnel, and it seems to be very similar to this one coming out. So here's an image from Mark Lehner where we can see a kind of cross section, makes it easier to see the Osiris shaft with its three levels, and then the tunnel will be coming forward to the Sphinx and underneath it. We also have these images from The Symbolic Prophecy of the Great Pyramid, which was a 1936 book by Harvey Spencer Lewis. And this was supposed to be based on these ancient Rosicrucian maps and information that had been stored in their libraries, archives. I'm going to get very deep into these diagrams. There's this and also a map from above that basically shows this tunnel coming out from behind the Sphinx, going straight to the Coffer Pyramid and also splitting off at this section here to the other two pyramids as well. This has been somewhat disputed for a very long time if this is real or what it was based off of, but Harvey Spencer Lewis, the imperator of Amorc, the ancient mystical order of Rosicrucians, basically said that this information or this diagram was coming from knowledge that had been held by the mystery schools for a long time and was reinforced by recent excavations, which of course at that time he was talking about Salim Hassan and Salim Hassan's excavations all over the Sphinx Causeway specifically, where all these papers were reporting that there was a secret city discovered under there and all these incredible roomy courts and side chambers covered in reliefs and all these things. So that was in the late 20s into the 30s. and this came out shortly after. Of course, it's showing us this long hall under the body, with staircases going down and a shaft coming down from, behind the paw. This might be the right paw or left paw. Can't really tell from profile. But I'm going to speak very much about these maps and where they actually come from. I have what the world has never seen for 90 years, what I believe to be the original source map that was used both by Harvey Spencer Lewis as well as H.C. Randall Stevens, a man who also put forward very similar illustrations 1 year earlier in his book, The Voice of Ancient Egypt, or The Voice of Egypt, something like that, in 1935. Anyway, I'm going to reveal what I believe to be the original source map that was used by both of them and solve this 90-year-old Rosicrucian mystery, for the first time. That's going to be in the coming episodes. But for now, I just want to use this diagram and pose it hypothetically. How does this fit in? If we position that over here, what we're seeing is basically this hole under the body, this round hole behind it, which very interestingly is always shown with this arched ceiling, this domed ceiling, which is exactly what Boris Said Dobecki found in his scans. And then we can just look, this is hypothetically, it's just sloping slowly up and coming right under the third level of the Osiris shaft over here. And these right here, this would be Campbell's tomb, is the one shaft kind of directly behind the Sphinx, which is a very large one. And then there's a bunch of smaller ones along that route as well. Yes, there is a tunnel from the Sphinx to the middle pyramid and to the other two pyramids. This was known and described by the mystery schools. They would do these initiations in all three pyramids, but all of them you'd enter through the Sphinx, and then you'd go into the tunnel system and split off to whichever pyramid you wanted to go to. So what I'm about to reveal regarding that source map is very exciting stuff as well. But these scans we're getting from Boris's film, this is just another confirmation, that we have this tunnel. We'll have to see in person when we can get down there. I mean, 15 feet below ground right there, that's pretty easy to get into. We could at least drill and get a camera in there. But yeah, I think we've got so much evidence that suggests we have, plenty of reason for an on-site investigation and excavation. So hopefully we'll get it. Hopefully it'll open up to it. The more we prove that it's obviously there, the worse they look, pretending that there's nothing. There's obviously something. Obviously. Why is this evidence being suppressed? Why didn't Joseph Schor want it to come out? Why didn't, Zahi make these films that he said he would make with Boris? You have to ask those questions because it's very clear that this is real. We don't know exactly what it looks like, but we do also have the Waseda University scans. And these came out and they also showed this large chamber underneath and this tunnel coming out the back and the chamber below the front paws as well. These were seismic surveys done by the Japanese team from Waseda University. This was in 1987, I believe. Yeah. And this is another top image from that. And look, they had discovered this tunnel coming back. They're even giving it credit to the Schor team, which is great. So yeah, we need to excavate. We need to excavate these things. We got to find this tunnel connecting all the way between and get inside of it, because I guarantee this tunnel is going to go straight over to the Khafre pyramid. And that's where we're seeing immense tubes going down to huge structures. So, I think it's hard to say exactly, but from what we're seeing so far, this appears to be the main tunnel entrance that leads from the Sphinx to all three pyramids. It does exist. We have records of it. Now we have GPR confirmation of it. While we're talking about the Khafre project, these were the very first scans, the SAR scans that they've released about the Sphinx itself. They've been showing us a lot about the pyramids in the past few months, but this is specifically about the Sphinx. This was the first image we got from their Malta conference And then they presented this again at the Cosmic Summit Conference, which I attended and got to speak with Armando and Filippo all weekend. We had an amazing time. It was awesome. But they had just showed this briefly. This is just a screenshot from their presentation, so it's kind of low resolution, but you can see this whole chamber within the Sphinx's body they're showing, which is probably accessible through the hatch on the back that goes down, or potentially from the tail hole, which we know also comes up and into the body, but it's blocked off. So maybe that's actually connecting over to like this tunnel here or something like that. But we really wanted to see what was beneath the Sphinx's body. So at the Cosmic Summit Conference, I actually saw part of the scientific paper that they're working on, and I asked Filippo, is there any way you could give me some sneak peeks of some of the images that are going to be in the paper and I could release them ahead of time? Because he said the paper's finished and it's in the peer review process right now, so it's going to be published any day now. So everyone who's been waiting for this paper, it's nearly out, which is very exciting. I can't wait to read it myself. But Filippo said I could actually release the very first SAR scans from deep beneath the Sphinx. So I put out this film a few weeks ago and I released the scan. This is the Sphinx's body, its front paws here. That's the tomographic line cutting straight through it, and this is the courtyard around it. So this is the Sphinx Causeway coming alongside it towards the middle pyramid there. And yeah, this was so exciting. I was honored and privileged, just like their original first scans of the Khafre pyramid, to be the very first person allowed to release this brand new breaking news, this imagery of what is actually directly under the Sphinx. I'll also say beforehand in their original press conference, they had released this one, their press conference March 15th and 16th, when they originally released all this information. They gave us this incredible image that's cutting straight from the Khafre pyramid along the Khafre Causeway or the Sphinx Causeway straight to the Sphinx. That's the Sphinx and the Sphinx Temple. So we're seeing something all along the shallow areas right beneath the causeway, which is the very same tunnel that we're talking about in this film with Boris Said and everything we just looked at. We're also seeing these super deep, tubes going down to this level of additional chambers, 1.2 kilometers down, or like 1 kilometer down to 1.2 kilometers. So, wow, this image was amazing, showing all of these things going 1,200 meters down, all along between the pyramid and the Sphinx. But as you can see, it's cut off here, though they're showing the red line continuing. So this was the section we had never seen before. They did also show us in the Malta conference and Cosmic Summit this model that showed more of this stuff, including this is underneath the Campbell's tomb, which is the shaft that's right behind the Sphinx. This is the Sphinx over here, and they're showing us one of the tubes going down to this huge chamber underneath the Sphinx, directly underneath the Sphinx, and a couple more of these shafts that they were starting to look at. So this is the image with that other scan overlaid just to generally show that basically this is the tunnel going all the way across to the Sphinx, all this red area, but we're also seeing these tubes basically all along the distance between the two, which is phenomenal. But anyway, here is the image that I first shared from their paper showing the scan under the Sphinx. And there you see it. This is the chamber. This is that giant cube they were showing here. That's this cube, right? So we're seeing multiple views of it, different polarizations. These are measured in pixels, but up here you can see the height, the depth in meters. So let's look closer at this. This is coming down to 1,200 meters. So basically this is 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer right at this level where this lower chamber starts. So whatever we're seeing here, that's over 1 kilometer deep, this chamber. And the much bigger one is centered around 600 meters. That's 650, kind of centered on this lower half of it. But this is the huge cubic chamber right there. So, I showed a few different slides closer up. And you can watch that video if you want to hear me describe more about these scans, but this is obviously very deeply connected to the story we're looking at today. All this information from Boris Said and, all of this search for what was actually under the Sphinx back then. Well, they would have really loved to see these scans today, I think. This is a closer up of the 1 kilometer deep area, and here's a closer up of the big cube, which I believe you're kind of getting a sense of two faces of it. Like this would be one, and then this is the other side. Though again, it's just a single 2D slice, so it's hard to really understand the interpretation of it. But let's just, you can see what looks like these could be other little tunnels running off out the sides of it. I'm not sure if that's just the kind of banding on the image, but basically you can see a lot going on here at the 600-meter level down. And we have to, compare that to the dream steel. Is this the exact chamber that we're seeing directly below the Sphinx on the dream steel, the record hall? It looks like it could very well be. We know that this is directly below the Sphinx. It's deeper down. It's not right under the body, but that's not, that's not too big a deal. This is potentially the record hall. Um, I believe that these records are placed in many different chambers all around the underground of the plateau. And I think there's others that, we're going to talk about specific locations later. But I think there's certainly a case to say, this certainly could be the main hall that we're seeing under the Sphinx on the Dream Steel. You be the judge, you can just take a look at that and see. I'll show you too. This one was just from a screenshot from their videos too, but you can see this is Campbell's tomb. So this is the one right behind the Sphinx. In this image, you can see it's this green one here. This would be Campbell's tomb, so that shaft. But Campbell's tomb was explored to some extent. They made it down to some level, and I don't know, maybe down to here or something. It looks like there might be a false floor at some point because it was nowhere near as deep as 1,200 meters that they're showing here, where again, we're seeing at the 1 kilometer to 1.2 kilometer level, this whole city level is what what they're calling a city potentially, because we can see all of these different structures right at that level. So amazing. And then if you look up towards the top, you can see what may very well be the exact same tunnel we're talking about here. This tunnel that cuts across from the Osiris shaft over all the way to the Sphinx. So either this one or this one could be the very same tunnel that Thomas Dobecki is confirming in these GPR scans. So there's a lot of crossover here. I can't say for sure, but it's looking like we've certainly got a connection from the Sphinx right over to the Osiris shaft. This is all very important information. I just want to lay out together. And then Filippo also said I could release one other image from their scientific paper, which is from the Menkaure pyramid. So the smallest, the third pyramid, you can see there's the tomographic line, and it kind of just looks like one huge column from this angle, but we can see that it's actually, I think, one central and two along the sides of it, because we can see in their other image that they're showing 4 tubes under the Menkaure pyramid going down to one big box rather than 2 and 8 for the Khafre pyramid. So we got these 2 new scan images from the scientific paper coming out very soon. And, especially this new Sphinx one was so exciting to me. Could this be the Hall of Records? Could that be the main chamber of records and artifacts? Was Cayce right? I mean, I believe, I'm not entirely sure, but I believe this is west to east. So this would be the east and this would be west, meaning this is kind of shooting out forward underneath the front paws rather than the hind area. So I was so privileged to be given the honor of permission to release this image to the world for the very first time to see what is actually deep under the Sphinx. This is all coming together so quickly. So it's at an exponential rate. We're just getting so much evidence of all these structures. and I'm doing my best to just tie them all together and show how they all fit. But also, you can see that up towards the top in the shallower areas, there's all kinds of stuff going on. We're seeing, a big, big chamber up here, and then, all kinds of stuff off to the side. So, this could be seeing the tunnel coming out the back, in this area. You can't really get a lot of resolution or see what's going on too much, but you can see that there's a lot of action between these different ones. So, I believe this level right here where it kind of shifts to a different kind of vibration, it's possible that this is showing the water table. That might be the water level, and maybe that's why it looks different below than above, but we're not sure about that either. So anyway, those are the new images of the Sphinx. Very, very exciting. This could be the record hall, and we could get into, if this has a spiral staircase going down, we could be potentially able to get into this very deep chamber that is enormous. This is one other image I just wanted to share quick while I'm getting into this a little bit, because a lot of people have been asking about the spirals that are wrapping around these columns. And this was an image that Filippo shared in an interview I recently did with him and Chris Leto on the Leto files. And Chris has been really, doing a good job of analyzing some of this stuff. He's a former F-16 pilot. He has radar experience. So we got him and Filippo to have a conversation about the radar tech. But Filippo busted out this one, which you can really see the spiral wrapping around. You can see this consistent angle. So everyone who's just asking, where are they getting this idea that there are spirals wrapping around these tubes? Well, here's an image that shows it better than ever before. And these are, as they say, potentially staircases, ramps, walkways. They could be something else. They could be, I don't know, components or functional within the machinery of whatever's going on here. They could just be pathways. It could be like the Guggenheim. If you've ever gone to the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, it's just one big spiral museum. And the point is to show art on all these walls. So you're just walking up a spiral staircase and you're seeing this whole story of whatever the art exhibit is at the time. It's possible that's the case. Maybe this is just a walkway that's relaying an entire story all the way down, and there's reliefs and pictures on the walls carved in, and it's just a way of telling a long, continuous narrative of the story as you walk down. Like I say, in Hawara, even in a lot of these places, I think they're just using all this surface area to be telling stories. It's possible that's what all these columns are. Maybe their walls are all lined with these inscriptions and reliefs, and it's like a huge Guggenheim museum, or like 100 of them, that are each 100 times taller than the Guggenheim Museum itself. That was a Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. But anyway, we don't know. Of course, we still need to get down there and see what they are. We just don't know. But I think it's very interesting how clear you can see the spirals on this image. So this was a screenshot from their press conference. It's lower resolution, but you can actually see the Osiris shaft scan without the image they had covering this section here. So in this one, you can see this whole structure to the left of it or to the west of it, because we'd be looking north in this image. And so, yeah, again, this is the first, second, and third level of the Osiris shaft. And those are normal sized chambers. But we can see this structure over to the west of it is huge. These are giant chambers that are right underneath the surface, not very deep. That's probably just like 50 feet down. These huge chambers are starting. And that black, it's really showing a large empty void space. And it does look like this comes right down to this whole level of 80 meters down. It's saying all of this other enormous spaces down there. These would be very, very big compared to the normal sized rooms of the Osiris shaft. So we really don't know much at all about this structure right here, but we can show you a sneak peek from what's coming up in future episodes. This is some of Bill Brown's GPR scans with the NRIAG from 2006, which were all along the Sphinx Causeway. and we do have a confirmation of this major structure right next to the Osiris shaft. This one's the Osiris shaft, and just to the side of it, we had another major void. This one, T3. So that would be this void right here. What we're looking at could be the very same as the Cuffer Project scans. So yet another confirmation from the GPR and SAR. We're seeing the same structures. So Filippo Biondi's method, the Biondi protocol, it's being more and more verified, but I'm not going to go too deep into this until we have Bill to come on and explain it for himself. But you can just see we did pick up another structure right there. We have the GPR scans. So we don't know of any actual ground access to that secondary void that's just west of the Osiris shaft, but I can show you in this little video clip I have. This is right on top of the Osiris shaft. Basically, I walk around and come in from this way. This is the path that comes down and opens up, you'll see. But I can show you there is one other huge shaft here that's right west of the Osiris shaft, this one right here. It's giant. You also have this little building, a little structure built right next to it, which is usually a pretty good sign that, there's something there to protect or, keep a close watch on. But basically this huge, huge shaft, it's just to the west of the Osiris shaft. You can see me go down to show the access right here. But that's something you can see from above as well. I don't know if that is actually the structure they're showing in the scan or if it connects into it. Potentially there's tunnels leading out from that shaft that connect over to it, or maybe it is actually the structure they're showing. Right here, you can see the stairway that leads down to the Osiris shaft. And that's it right there. So that's how you get in. This is directly underneath the causeway. And yeah, you can see that shaft right next to it. You just get another quick little glimpse. It's right there. You've got this little gate here, and there's the causeway. So that's very interesting. You can actually see it from above. So here's the top view. You see the causeway. This is the shaft at the very beginning of that clip. This is the entrance into the Osiris shaft. And this is the huge shaft right next to it with this little building built right next to that. So we don't know if this is actually the anomaly that they're showing us on that scan, or if maybe at a shallow level there are some tunnels, coming out from this shaft that come up, and what they're showing is really under the causeway. Um, the scan that Bill had showing the anomaly, it was more like right on the causeway, I believe. So we could be seeing an entrance that's going very deep here, but really is just cutting over, and perhaps what we're actually seeing from both teams are, showing a chamber right here. We don't really know. This is the Southern Mastaba field, which I made a whole film about before, showing there's just hundreds of these shafts going down. And over here, everyone wants to say these are just tombs. No, they're not just tombs. The mastabas are tombs. They're like above ground tombs, but they have shafts going down as well. But you can see there's some shafts inside the mastabas. There's other ones that are just all along here. You think every single one of these 6 in a row is a different tomb down there? No chance. No way. These are some of the shafts, if we went a little further over, you could see Campbell's tomb here. But, we know that these ones basically look like light and ventilation shafts that are going down to air out these tunnels, bring light down to the tunnels. It's very likely that, when you got a ton of them right in a row, what else could be their purpose? They're all full of sand right now, but they used to connect down right to these tunnel levels. So they would have brought air and light down there. It seems to me that that was their primary function. You definitely can't fit 6 different kings down here, 6 different tombs right next to each other. It's not how they did it. You can't attribute all these hundreds of shafts. This is much bigger. You're just seeing the corner that are all going down. They can't all be tombs. So anyway, you're getting a view here, and we do think there's more, more to see on the causeway. We're going to show you some more footage from the causeway and interesting features there. And next time we go back, we're going to look at this area much closer too and see if there's any way we can find anything, right under here. you can kind of see how this becomes like bedrock. It's carved out of the bedrock from here, but this is all built stones, it's megalithic blocks. Some of these blocks making up the causeway in this section are so huge that we can tell they are ceiling stones. They're the ceiling of a tunnel below. That's where you end up using these really huge stones. So, um, there's supposed to be another layer of stones on top of this, like the finishing paving layer would have been very nicely finished, and this is really what's remaining is the second level down. So without the finished casing stones on top, you get to see that there are these huge stones mixed in here, which is very much indicative of a ceiling to the tunnel below. So again, we have evidence all along this causeway that the tunnel is running straight below it. There's some that are coming across it. All filled in. What's down in there? Why'd they leave this filled with sand? Where does it go?
So this was one of the entrances to the underground tunnel. We have, actually on GPR, we have all that stuff.
Yeah. Had it since 2006. This is the Sphinx Causeway, straight down to the Sphinx. And straight up to the Khafra Pyramid, they call it. G2. So one other thing I feel I have to mention here is this work from my friend Howard Middleton Jones. And this was from his website, which is recently crashed in the last couple months. It's been down, but I found it on the Wayback Machine. This was an article he sent to me a year or two ago. But I've just been starting to talk with him a bit more, and we're going to do a deep dive interview on all of this soon. But it's completely relevant because it has to do with Zahi Hawass. It's proof, further proof, that he was all through the 90s searching for the Hall of Records himself. He had meetings with this team and was asking them for more advice on how to actually access the Hall of Records. So Howard was working with James Wilkie and Dr. Jan Murta, and they came out with this incredible 2-volume book series, Giza Genesis, The Best Kept Secrets, between 2001 and 2003. So he's just giving a basic introduction here, but in this article, he decides to share this private fax from Jim to Dr. Hawass, the then director of the Giza Necropolis, in December of 1998. So this is the exact same time period, which, as you will see, confirms that Dr. Hawass was indeed interested in finding the location of the Hall of Records and was amenable to any serious offer to help locate same. The search continued utilizing Jim's proposals with the famous Gantenbrink robot, where a robotic vehicle was sent through the shafts of the Great Pyramid, and more recently with similar attempts by Dr. Hawass using a newer modified robot. So he's talking about Rudolf Gantenbrink, who in the 90s was exploring the air shafts from the King and Queen's chambers. So this fax was sent after a subsequent meeting with Jim and Dr. Hawass in November of 98. So 1 year after that interview with Art Bell that Boris did at Hawass' office on the Giza Plateau. After the meeting where Jim offered a number of proposals, Hawass gave Jim the free range of the plateau to investigate the proposals. So anyway, I can link this in the description and you can read it, but this is the facts right here. You can see that James Wilkie actually gave Dr. Hawass instructions on how to access some secret locations within the Great Pyramid that would supposedly lead towards these record halls, according to their research. So anyway, it's just something further to prove that Zahi was, in fact, interested in finding the location of the Hall of Records back in 1998. So again, we're seeing that Zahi is searching for the Hall of Records all through the 90s. He's motivated to try and find them, and yet publicly he still just keeps saying, this is a myth, it's a legend, it's not real. Forget Edgar Cayce, there's nothing down there. While he is literally secretly going and pursuing every attempt he can to try and find it, he's denying it publicly. It's extreme hypocrisy. What else can you call this? I don't know what to say about it. But we can actually see where it ended up landing today, just in the last, in the last 24 hours, in fact. This was amazing. All these things were happening in such a synchronistic way. But literally, as I was just finishing editing this whole video, John Van Auken came out with this video that he put on the Edgar Cayce website, the Edgar Cayce blog. Um, John Van Auken, I met him there last year. We talked a lot about this. He's a brilliant researcher. He's been writing books and articles and touring with the ARE for many years. He was leading the ARE Egypt tours, and he's an absolute expert on Edgar Cayce. And he's known Hawass for a very long time. So this is basically an update to the minute of where this stands, the whole relationship that Zahi had with the ARE. Basically, he's been doing all this work since the 90s, especially. He was searching for the Hall of Records, Zahi Hawass himself. And yet all the while, he's still openly claiming that Cayce's a fraud, it's not true, it's just myth, it's just legend. But at the same time, he's going to lecture at the ARE, and he's getting his education sponsored by Jehoda and Joseph Schor, who were members of the ARE, is very hypocritical. He's been, working with the ARE since the 70s and 80s, and still he's just going out there saying that it's fake and that it's a myth. And so John Van Auken, who's known him for a long time, actually just came out and said, I just went to Zahi's lecture. He gave 33 lectures in the United States in the past few months. That magic number again. Interesting. But John said that when he went to see Zahi speak, he basically said that Edgar Cayce was wrong about the existence of a chamber beneath the Sphinx. So, John shared evidence with Dr. Hawass demonstrating that his team was drilling at the wrong angle, which could have led to an inaccurate conclusion. We do have proof that, one way or another, Zahi did drill at the wrong angle. He drilled at the wrong location. We know exactly where anomaly A is, and we can see that he drilled, just a couple feet off of it. He intentionally drilled as close as he could to it, knowing it wouldn't actually access it. And this was his forever after excuse to say that there's nothing under the Sphinx at all. We drilled and it's not there. Well, he did intentionally drill several feet away from it just to make sure he wouldn't hit it. So you can see that on the map from Lehner, and Manu Safezadeh added in the position of the drilling and the chamber itself.
Hello, I'm John Van Auken, the Director of Legacy Education and the ARE magazine Venture Inward here at the Edgar Cayce Center. And last night I attended Zahi Hawass's big Royal Evening Lecture Tour. He had a stop here in Virginia Beach, and I went there last night. Unfortunately, he apparently is beginning these talks all over North America, US and Canada, by saying that Edgar Cayce was wrong. There is nothing under the Sphinx. He and Mark Lerner drilling under the Sphinx, and they found nothing. And so I'm here to tell you that Thutmose IV and Edgar Cayce may still be right because they were drilling at the wrong angle. Now, Thutmose was in a dream. Edgar Cayce was in a deep state of sleep trance. He was nicknamed the sleeping prophet because he would go into a state like that. And he too saw a chamber under the Sphinx. He saw a chamber and a passageway to another important record cache from the ancient Egyptians. And so this is what Zahi was referring to, and of course he feels Cayce was wrong. I was surprised he opens the talk that way, but I wanted to at least give you an alternative view that Thutmose and Cayce may still be correct. The Sphinx is toward the east, and Khafre, or the second pyramid, is back up the causeway, and there's the entrance to the Osiris shaft, right close to this whole situation. So why Zahi didn't fully believe Cayce's chamber underneath the Sphinx, I'm not sure, but I know his drilling misled him to think there is nothing under the Sphinx, and I just want to show an alternative view to that. because I know he's spreading this word all over the U.S. and Canada. So here I am hoping that you can see what I'm sharing and make your own judgment, and maybe someday we'll get a drilling done at the deeper angle. Thank you very much. I just want to share with you our view. I've known Zahi all my adult life. He's a genuinely good man, a terrific self-promoter, but a very good archaeologist. So I hope we can resolve this disagreement sometime in the near future. Thank you.
Now, I just want to also say that the goals that Boris had for these films, I think they're still completely valid goals. We should be trying to get into Anomaly A under the Sphinx's paw. We should be trying to get into that tunnel that's leading out from the Sphinx heading west. We should be trying to get into the tunnels leading out from the third level of the Osiris shaft, as well as the tunnel detected by Dobecki underneath the third level of the Osiris shaft. These are two different tunnels leading out there. And it's possible that even underneath the sarcophagus on the third level is the access to the tunnel that he discovered, what he said, about 9 feet lower. All of these things still need to be investigated. We should still be pushing to excavate all those places. Now, Rupert Murdoch being a 33rd degree Mason, yes, this is a pretty important point here, because in the end, it had nothing to do with Boris or Joseph Schor or John West or any of them, but Zahi ended up getting his Fox News special, basically above the 33rd degree. Yeah, that's what they do. They control the narrative of history. That's very important to them. They want to control the minds of everyone on Earth. They want to make sure the narrative is set by them and no one else. If this sounds crazy to you, then you've just not been paying attention. I mean, they own National Geographic, they own Fox, they own the Smithsonian. They're in the business of controlling the narrative of ancient history. They control all of these things in order to present the narrative they want. It's simple as that. You've got the Vatican, you've got the United Nations. It's all one big club, really. And they all have a lot to lose if humanity learns the truth about what's under Giza. This is just simple facts understood by anyone who has really looked as deeply as I have. You can really learn a lot by reading the book by Robert Bauval and Ahmed Osman, Breaking the Mirror of Heaven, The Conspiracy to Suppress the Voice of Ancient Egypt. And this book tells you everything you need to know about Zahi's history, how he ended up getting into the place he's in now. But there are alliances and allegiances and agendas. So, it's not necessarily up to Zahi. He's a gatekeeper, yes. He's a front man, yes. But a lot of these decisions aren't really made by him either. He has to take commands, basically, from those above him. And if he wants to get these contracts with companies like, Fox and stuff, he has to play ball with some of these unsavory characters, let's say. We also know that Napoleon, who was also a Freemason, visited the Hawara Labyrinth in the late 1700s. And a couple decades later, another French Freemason actually came in the 1820s and dug this giant canal straight through the site, which ended up flooding not only the upper level of chambers, but also the entrance into it. So this was another clear conspiracy to conceal what was underground at Hawara, which is down in the Fayum Oasis. I've talked about quite a bit, but Louis de Cordier, Bill Brown, and I just released a whole film about that. There's major big news coming from Hawara as well. Louis has basically just premiered this huge discovery at Hawara, these new scans that were actually done 10 years ago, but have not been public until just a couple weeks ago. It was Louis who released them. Louis, who was originally on the Mataha expedition in 2008 at Hawara. And so I talked with him and Bill Brown as well, who Bill was obviously, if you've seen the earlier episodes, involved in another expedition there between 2007 and 2009. So I talked with both of them about these new discoveries and this new scan, and it's absolutely amazing. I can't possibly not just mention it quickly as we're talking about all this stuff, because basically Lewis and the people who were working back in 2014-15, they found a 40-meter metallic object in the very center of the entire Hawara labyrinth. 40 meters is like 130 feet about. It's a huge object, and he said that this metal was unlike any other metal he had ever detected underground. So it's very, very major discovery, and Lewis is the one who first brought this forward, and this is the only video about it where Lewis is actually speaking about it. So check this one out as well. So Zahi and Rupert Murdoch ended up making this film in 1999 that was called Opening the Lost Tombs Live from Egypt. Now, that was the big spectacle that Zahi was after. And he and 33rd degree Mason Rupert Murdoch ended up getting to make it. And it turned out to have nothing whatsoever to do with these tunnels that Dobecki found, nothing to do with opening up the hole underneath the Sphinx in the tail entrance. It had nothing to do with anomaly A in the chamber underneath the left front paw. It had nothing to do with any of that or any of these revelations that they came across. He did go into the Osiris shaft, and he did basically explain that it was his discovery, which was not true. But he showed some footage from the third level. He stood in front of the tunnels that lead out from the third level of the Osiris shaft, which, you know, I've covered in past films as well. We know that those tunnels go to some unknown destination. No one ever really figured it out. He and Zahi ended up doing a project with a Japanese team, and they sent an endoscope very, very deep into it, which eventually did open up into this cave structure. But that was never made public. I found the leaked footage. It's on YouTube now, and I can link that in the description as well. But the only person who has ever actually crawled in there and photographed and documented it is our good friend Richard Gabriel, who also helped document the NC2 complex in the northwest of the plateau in a film we did together revealing NC2. But you can see Richard Gabriel's documentation of the tunnel in the links as well. However, Zahi and the Japanese team never even showed the world what they found there, and they just stopped talking about it. In this 1999 TV special, you can see, and I ended my interview with Ray Grossi with this clip as well, because it's very relevant. This was the outcome of the entire thing. No Boris, no Joe Schor, no tunnels under the Sphinx. This was basically the biggest reveal that he gave us at the end of that entire 1999 live Fox special. So it's pretty easy to see here that, you know, the Freemason one, they covered it up, they hid the real story, and they just tried to release some other things that they thought the public would get excited about. But clearly, you know, the real story of the tunnels under the Sphinx got suppressed, basically. With these first views of the GPR scans from Dobecki, hearing Boris's account of what they had found, all of this is very, very important corroborating evidence. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this film as much as I did. I think it's extraordinary. I'm so grateful to Bill Busha for actually having the tape and sharing it. I'm so glad I asked the public if anyone did have this, because it's just been sitting out there. It has never been made public before. So anyway, with that, I will leave you off with Zahi's last words from 1999 after all this happened. This is what Zahi had to say about Edgar Cayce on Fox News Live when he finally got his primetime TV special.
Zahi, the American prophet Edgar Cayce, talked years and years ago about a lost civilization, hidden tunnels that would lead to answers about it. Could this have anything to do with that?
You know, Susie, Cayce, Edgar Cayce and lost civilization, it's a legend, it's a myth. The Arabs in the last century, they talked about all of this, and psychic brought it to us back. But, to be fair, I did not excavate this tunnel yet. Then really I don't know where it leads us. But I always say that you never know what the sand and the tunnels of Egypt may hide